To the second in our series of the campus-wide leadership series. I'm Robert Klein. I'm Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, and this program is put together between the university and the hospital, the various schools, health professions, graduate studies, nursing and medicine, as well as the new UKP, and hopefully I didn't leave anybody out, and HR on the hospital side. And that's kind of the fun part of this, is seeing people sitting in the audience who oftentimes don't get to sit together, people from the university, from the hospital, and we face common issues in management and leadership, and that's what this series is about. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest. If you read his bio on the Kansas City Symphony site, which I did this morning, you'll understand why we invited him. Some of the highlights. He has built relationships with audiences of all ages and backgrounds, conducting an astounding volume of diverse programs and supporting the work of music director Michael Stern. Well, I think that's a lot of what we all do, building relationships, building teams, and dealing with a very diverse workforce and a very diverse patient population. Helped lead the expansion of the Symphony's concert offerings, particularly in the education series, and we're all about educating patients, educating our students, residents, various trainees. Believes passionately that music and the arts are essential parts of education for all young people. Music in particular supports and nurtures the skills for growth and success in all disciplines. So there's another piece that I think we're all involved in. I love the title, Playing Well with Others. I am a seasoned subscriber to the Kansas City Symphony Pops, and our guest brings joy to the stage, and I think many of us, as we fulfill our, we look at responsibilities, that we also hopefully bring joy to the workplace. So it's my pleasure to introduce Maestro, I'm going to go with the old pronunciation, Demerjian. Did I do pretty well?
Yes.
Yes. I was misinformed by the Symphony folks on pronunciation, so I'll let you do your own name.
Thank you, Dr. Klein, and thank you to everybody for being here today and for having me here. I'm actually about to marry a public health professional in just a couple of months, and so there's a part of me that thinks my future wife should be the one talking to this group of people in this profession. But it really is an absolute pleasure to be here and to just share with you all a little bit of my story and my thoughts on leadership. I'm going to level with you, though, right at the beginning. I'm also here not just to tell you my story, not just to talk about leadership, to talk about leadership through music, which is what I do, but to also hopefully get as many of you as possible excited about classical music and excited and more informed about what's going on at the Kansas City Symphony. So let's start out with a little bit of an exercise. There are, I would estimate, I'm not good at things like this, but I would estimate there are about 130 people in the room or so, maybe. What I would guess is that there are, among the 130 of you, there are maybe 10 classical music diehards. You love classical music, you love Bach, Mozart, Schubert, Mahler. You go to the symphony, you can't get enough of it. Your car radio is always tuned to Kansas Public Radio's classical programming. You probably played an instrument when you were in grade school and even maybe through college, and I'm sure you're planning to start your kids on the violin or the piano if they haven't already. So that's group number one. Then there's group number two, and I'm not giving this a hierarchy, I'm just making a list right now. Then there's group number two, and that's probably about 40 to 50 or so people who don't mind classical music. who have an appreciation for it, who will sometimes have it on in the background, no particular problem with it. It's not necessarily your first choice, but sometimes if your friend has an extra ticket to a concert and invites you to go along, you'll go with them, no problem. Then there's the third group of people, and that group of people is the group of people that just does not have any particular interaction with classical music in their life. And maybe, just feel like it's not for you. Maybe you find classical music is a little bit boring. You don't find a connection to it. Maybe you caught a nice nap at the last concert that you went to. No judgment. We've all done it, myself included. Anytime I go to a 3-hour opera, my motto is catch a good 10-minute snooze in Act 1 and you're good for the rest of the night. And the third group is, generally speaking, in any population you encounter, the largest group. So now I'm going to put my estimations to the test. So raise your hand if you've ever attended any Kansas City Symphony event, any concert of any sort. See, okay, a good number of you. Okay, now put your hands down, and just did education concerts earlier this week where we did the raise your hand, put your hands down thing. So I apologize if I'm being a little bit overly teachy with this. Second question is, raise your hand if you have been to multiple symphony events or sort of a repeat offender, a regular attendee at some concerts. Yeah, so slightly smaller group. Okay, now raise your hand if you are a subscriber or even a donor to the symphony. I was pretty close. Yeah, so there are a couple of ways for me, as somebody who loves music, does it for my work, is an advocate for music and an advocate for music in the community. There are a couple of ways for me to look at that. I can look around at the number of raised hands dwindling as I asked about heightened levels of commitment and engagement with the symphony. And I could stand here and say, oh my God, it's hopeless if we can't even find a plurality of people among one of the more educated and informed and curious groups of people in the city. Then what are we going to do? That's one way of looking at it. And there are many people in my profession and in any profession that can sort of get caught in that spiral. But the other perspective, and the way I look at it, is not, oh my God, but my God. What an opportunity to present music in a new and fresh light, not just to the people in this room, but to every single potential audience member in Kansas City. Classical music occupies an interesting place in society. There are a number of stigma and stereotypes out there about classical music. I'm sure you're familiar with all of them. And since it's lunchtime, I'm going to use food metaphors. So one way of thinking about classical music is it's kind of like vegetables. You know they're good for you, that you should snack on them more often, and man, if only they tasted a little bit better and went down a little bit easier, please pass the cookies. From another perspective, some might argue that classical music is like a gourmet dessert or a very high-priced bottle of wine or scotch. Delicious, satisfying, but ultimately a luxury. Now, those two perspectives, if you look at it from my perspective, those two arguments are about as contradictory and far apart on the spectrum as you can get. And yet many musicians, many professional musicians, have heard them so many times that we have almost unconsciously internalized those stereotypes and are trying to work within them, which you can imagine must be maddening when you're trying to encourage people to come to your concerts and hear this great music that we love so much. There are statistics out there that say only 3% of the American population will ever potentially like classical music, which is, an incredibly restrictive box to put oneself in. I will tell you the truth, or at least I will tell you my truth. And I'm going to go back to the food for just 1 second. Classical music is the vegetables, it's the meat, it's the fruit, it's the starch, and it's the dessert. And if there is one thing that I am certain of, is that there is a flavor of it for every palate, and that there's a seat at the table for everyone. And you can see I've got confidence in that attitude, whether your internal dialogue is going, yeah, definitely, or saying, well, okay, he sounds a little bit idealistic and a little bit naive, but I truly do have all the confidence in the world in that statement. And right there is really the first, the first statement that I can make about leadership in my experience. A conductor isn't just the leader of an orchestra, but is the leader of the audience as well. And by extension, the orchestra is a leader in the community, and it is the responsibility of a leader not for a single moment to doubt the capacity of the people that he is leading, he or she is leading, to realize his or her vision, his or her dreams. You don't choose music. Music chooses you. That's what my academic advisor at Harvard when I was an undergrad told me when I told him I was thinking about choosing a career in music, but I wasn't sure if it was the right thing for me. You don't choose music. Music chooses you. I was asked in an interview a couple of weeks ago, I was asked, where do you see yourself in 10 years? And the answer that I gave, it was on the fly, and I'm actually pretty proud of it. It was an answer on the fly. I probably should have had one prepared for a question that standard, but I said, in the short time that I've been in this profession, I have never once landed where I thought I was going to be. So it would be very hard to tell you where I was going to be in 10 years, but I've always landed where I was supposed to be. And this is all to say that, I asked a very important teacher of mine when I first met him, actually. He wasn't my teacher yet, but he became a very important teacher. I asked him once when I was really seriously thinking about taking the leap and going into music as my profession. I asked him, do you think I should be a conductor? And he looked me square in the face and he said, absolutely not, because if you should, you wouldn't be asking me. And that actually was the nudge that I needed, and I think he knew that. But this is all by way of saying that, for any musician, passion is the ultimate driver, because you don't want to get into conducting if you have an affinity for job security. You don't want to get into music, period. If you like money, I would suggest a different profession. To tell you a little bit about myself, so as you can see now, this was never the plan for me. If you asked me in grade school what I wanted to be, professional musician was not what I would answer. I actually probably would have said I was going to be a doctor. I was very into biology when I was in high school. If you asked me in college where I was going to go to graduate school, I would have said New England. I would not have said New England Conservatory. And if you asked graduate student me at New England Conservatory where I was going to live for the first 4 years of my career, living in New England, having basically never left for my whole life, Kansas City, Missouri would not have been on the tip of my tongue. And yet, here I am. So as I said, I grew up just outside of Boston in Lexington, Massachusetts. I grew into a very musical family, also a very culturally and intellectually rich family. All of Armenian background, we all were. My father was an immigrant from Syria. My mother was second generation. Her family had been in or around Boston for about 50 years by that point. Both of my parents were the first in their families to go to college. And both of them were extremely talented musicians who really, who could have gone into it professionally. My father was a violinist, also a PhD in mechanical engineering from MIT, MBA, big thinker, extrovert. He was the one who taught me how to do math. He was teaching me how to do, long division when I was 4 years old, so you can imagine what that was like. My mother was sort of the strong but silent hand behind the family. She was pianist and a singer, gifted writer. She was the grammar Nazi in my family, so if you ever hear me correcting, when I end sentences with prepositions or anything like that, you can know that's my mother's voice echoing in the back of my head. And she was the creative one who taught me to love words and who taught me to love my own internal creativity. And then you have my older sister who played the violin and the piano and sang, did all the things that my parents did it better than them. And she is this charismatic, eloquent, resourceful, persistent woman who could have been a very successful operatic soprano, but she decided to pursue journalism, and you may have heard her Moscow coverage over the last year on NPR, and she writes for the Washington Post now. But music was a fact of life. Music was a fact of life for me growing up, and growing up in such a, I guess you would call, high-powered family, being the baby of the family, and not just the baby of my own nuclear family, but I was the baby of my extended family for the first 20 years I was alive. I was always looking for a way to distinguish myself somehow, to carve out my own turf. And so the way I did that was, first of all, I wanted to play an instrument that nobody else in the house played, lest anybody tried to give me advice, of which I assure you there was no shortage in my family, and still is no shortage in my family. And I picked the cello because it was different, and also because Yo-Yo Ma was a rock star in my eyes. I had seen him on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and I was also telling you. And I was also very fortunate, by pure coincidence actually, to be in the same kindergarten class as his daughter. And so I actually got to meet him when I was 5 years old, and I remember when I was 7 years old starting to play the cello, he was a chaperone on a school field trip. So there's little 7-year-old me sitting in the back of the bus next to Yo-Yo Ma, and he's asking me, so what are you playing? And he's talking to me just like I'm any other musician, not like he's the biggest, superstar in the classical music world, and I've been playing cello for exactly 3 weeks at that time. I'm serious. I've been playing cello for exactly 3 weeks at that time. And, that left such an impression on me. He was already the person that I wanted to be like, and I still strive to be like him 22 years later. But the fact that he was there, talking to me right on the level, taught me such a valuable lesson, and I didn't even realize it, about, how you treat everybody that you interact with, no matter how old or young, educated, resourceful, whatever their financial background, you always meet people on the same level. And the decision to play the cello would, in many ways, be the most important decision that I ever made. And I didn't know it then, but would set me on the course that I'm still on now. And it's because playing cello meant that I could play in orchestras. And I remember the first time I played in a full symphony orchestra. I was 14 years old. And we were playing Dvorak's New World Symphony, which, if you don't know it, I highly recommend that you go on Spotify and find a recording. It's a symphony that Dvorak wrote in the 1890s, in the early 1890s. He was from Czech Republic, and he was brought over by a bunch of Americans that were passionate about music and wanted to create a classical music world in America that didn't exist yet. And so they brought Dvorak over and tasked him with starting a music school in New York City. And while he was here, he traveled around America and listened to all of the various folk musical influences in the country and wrote this symphony as almost a postcard back to his homeland. And the title was Symphony No. 9, quote, "From the New World." And I remember sitting there in the middle of the cello section, and at first just being overwhelmed by, and not knowing what I was doing for the first time in an orchestra. And then about 30 minutes in, I remember this sort of stillness and calm overtook me for a moment. And thinking, wow, there are 100 individuals in this room, and everybody is exerting this incredible energy. Everybody's playing their own instrument, everybody's playing their own line, everybody's doing something different, and yet all in pursuit of this total synchronicity and no pun intended, harmony, this larger harmonious goal, and I was, just overwhelmed by the majesty of that phenomenon. I had never encountered anything in my life more phenomenal than a symphony orchestra, and to be completely honest, I still haven't. And from that moment, I wanted to be as connected to every aspect of this incredible organism that is an orchestra, and it became obvious to me very quickly that conducting was the best way to do that. So before I go on with my life story, I want to pause for a second and talk about this word that I've said many times over already, which is the word symphony. I'm curious, actually, because, just raise your hand if you think that you know what a symphony is. We use it sort of, let me see. We use the word symphony sort of interchangeably sometimes. We use it to refer to an organization sometimes. Sometimes we use the word symphony as a substitute for the word orchestra. There's also this pesky word out there, philharmonic, which we use interchangeably sometimes with symphony. Symphony actually comes from an Italian word, sinfonia, which is derived from the word to mean all voices singing together. And that's really the basis for what an orchestra is. A symphony is the very embodiment that out of many different voices, we are one, we are unified. And that has been the driving force and my mission as a conductor and as a leader to realize. Now, in my family, there was a bit of an unofficial philosophy about music, and that was earn your money elsewhere and spend it on music. But as I said, I was always the one to carve out my own turf, and in this case, it would be no different, although it took me a little bit of time to realize that music was the right path for me. I was maniacal about music when I was in high school, even though I never actually thought that it was the right thing to pursue professionally. I always thought that, the people who went into music, there were only two types of people that went into music. The really good people, of which I did not consider myself one, because while I loved music, I did not love practicing as much as a lot of my young colleagues, or people for whom they didn't have any other option. They didn't have any other professional avenues. But nonetheless, I worked up the chutzpah to learn a little bit about conducting, and then to ask my high school orchestra director when I was a senior if I could conduct the orchestra in a concert, and she said yes somehow. And I just felt right up there. I can't describe anything else, but I felt like the podium was where I was meant to be. And my sister at the time was an undergraduate at Harvard, and so I was, going back and forth between Lexington and Cambridge, and I was seeing the operas that she was singing in and seeing the performances that she was part of, and I saw that because Harvard doesn't have a music performance faculty, almost all of their productions and concerts were conducted by students. And so, of course, it became my top choice school. Like so many others, I wanted to go to Harvard in order to take advantage of the conducting opportunities that were on campus. And I'll let you in on a dirty little secret with me in Harvard. And I promise that's the last time I will drop the H word. I didn't get in at first. I was deferred. And that stung. So when and my sister did get in early action. So when I ultimately got in spite of being around the campus and having an older sister who was kind of a force to be reckoned with, I went in feeling like a bit of an outsider and feeling like I had something to prove. And that's the next characteristic of leadership that has really served me well: perseverance. Conducting is not a profession to get into, as I said, if you're fond of security, if you like having a plan. It's not the right profession. Let me try to put this in context. It is easier to make the NBA than it is to become a music director of a symphony orchestra in this country. And there's an extent to which your success depends on your perseverance. No matter how many auditions you lose, and we all lose many, many more than we win. I could wallpaper my bathroom with the number of rejection letters that I've received. But this perseverance matters because the reality is that most people aren't going to tough it out. And to have perseverance, you need conviction. And when I say conviction, I don't mean self-confidence. Self-confidence is nice, but if somebody's not telling somebody to feel confident is the worst possible thing when they're not feeling confident. Self-confidence is nice, but it waxes and wanes for all of us. And even when you are in a state of anxiety, conviction is what you rely on in your times of greatest doubt and struggle. That even when you're not confident, your mission, your vision, your code, what you're striving after needs to be pursued and is worth fighting for. And in my studies, I was driven by my mission that I brought up in the context of an orchestra, that collaboration is this ultimately unbreakable force that can make the world a better place. Now, you can argue that the one misstep that I took, no, not the one, but probably the biggest misstep that I took on my path as I had tried to apply this philosophy to my life was that I became a government major and I wanted to go into politics. That's how I wanted to make the world a better place. I lasted about 2 years. I don't like to talk about it much more than that. But my experience in college is really why I'm a conductor today. I learned how to, in spite of not going to a music school, I learned how to process information quickly. I learned how to read comprehensively, how to analyze and formulate arguments and present them articulately and publicly. And I got to conduct a symphony orchestra for 2 years as music director on campus. And that's what led to my applying to conduct in graduate school at New England Conservatory. At Conservatory, I became a full-time student of music for the first time in my life, got a master's degree, and talk about feeling like an outsider. When I got to music school for the first time, surrounded by kids who had been doing this for at least 4 years, if not more. The other guy that was in my program had already been an undergrad at the school. Both his parents were on the faculty. He had just won a major international conducting competition, and on top of that, he was younger than me. I really, really felt like I was on an island. But funny thing happened. It was all in my head. I was the one that cared about all of those obstacles the most. Nobody else around me seemed to. That other student is now my best friend and is going to be, in my wedding. He's my first phone call whenever I have a problem. We've helped each other out. He's helped me out a great deal. And my time at the conservatory opened doors to the Aspen Music Festival, which is where the Kansas City Symphony discovered me. And that was 4 years ago. And here I am, and the rest is history. So I encourage you, as hard as this is, because I always have to remind myself of this, view obstacles as opportunities. One of the most important composers of the 20th century, Igor Stravinsky, implored his students not to try to do or to be everything at once in their compositions. Don't feel like you have to use the whole orchestra. Don't feel like you have to use every compositional tool in your tool bag. Don't even desire to. Set parameters, and then maximize your creativity and ingenuity within those boundaries. His phrase was, chains will set you free. Really, I think, words to live by. Now, at this point, it seems appropriate that I point out the question that I receive more than any other at events like this. What does a conductor actually do? We'll do another one of these maybe a year from now, and I might have an answer for you on that question. But no, in all seriousness, a conductor in an orchestra is a force for music and a force for unity. If you think about it in the context of a sports team, a conductor is at once both a coach and a player on the team. Now, what distinguishes music, I think, from every other major art form is this very odd dichotomy, is that the physical aspect of music is not the art itself. You know, when you have sculpting, the medium becomes the art. You know, painting, visual art, you know, the medium becomes the realization of the art. You have a book. A book, it sits on a shelf. Those words, printed words on the page, have meaning. With music, the physical medium itself, the written down notes, is not music itself. Music is a fleeting art form. It exists in a moment as sound is being made, and then it's done, and it's renewed and recreated every time you pick up an instrument again, every time you perform again. The notes on the page are just a representation of that music, and it's a conductor's job to nurture the realization of this representation that the composers have left behind for us. First and foremost, a conductor's job is listening. You have to listen all the time. Listen to the musicians in the orchestra, listen to your colleagues in the administration and on the board, listen to the responses of the audience, but listening is not enough. You also really need to hear them. Not only listening to what they're saying, but really hear the meaning behind what you're saying. In rehearsal, you are the interpreter. You're sharing your vision of a piece of music with your colleagues, but you're standing in the Kansas City Symphony. I'm standing in front of 80 musicians in the orchestra, very few of whom I've been doing this longer than they have. I mean, you have people who have been professional musicians in that orchestra longer than I've been alive, and that's a very odd. That can be a very odd dynamic when you're standing there as the person in charge. You have 80 talented people, 80 different opinions on how the piece of music should go. And that just unfortunately doesn't work. So as you're sharing your vision with the orchestra through your physical gesture, you're also listening to them and trying to discover what visions for the music that they have. Taking all of these different visions and making them one. And doing so in a way, not everybody has to like it. You'll never be in a situation where everybody likes it. And there'll be people who, there'll be situations when you're standing up on the podium and you know that so-and-so over there in the viola section thinks that you are absolutely wrong. But you want to present it in a way that everybody will at least have respect for your ideas and be motivated to go in the same direction. A conductor is a facilitator. A conductor is a student of people. Studies individual musicians in the orchestra, understanding what each individual needs to maximize their own sense of expression, where there are challenges, where the conductor, by virtue of gesture, can help them navigate the more difficult moments in the music for them. And all of these challenges are spatial as much as they are technical and musical. You're trying to play with 80 other people. If you're sitting on that side of the room and you're trying to play with the person that's sitting on that side of the room, a go-between can help because there are delays in sound otherwise. But in many ways, one of the most important things a conductor can do is not do anything at all. Let things happen. Because at a certain point, the music takes on a life of its own, and a conductor, by virtue of giving too many commands, over-conducting, can really get in the way of the natural flow and inertia of this music. The conductor is both the brain of the orchestra and the heart of the orchestra, and you can't do it with both. You need both to create something that both moves people, but that is structured with enough intellect that everybody knows what path you're on. And then the most important thing, the most important quality that a conductor needs to have and that any leader needs to have is humility. Because a conductor is the only person on that stage who does not make a single sound. The conductor is both the music and yet does not make a single note. The best analogy that I can give to a conductor is the President of the United States. No real enumerated powers, and yet he derives his power from his ability to influence and inspire and persuade. And he derives his power from the music itself and from his humility before the composer, making sure that it's clear to everybody in the orchestra that this is not about ego, that it's never about you. It's about the realization of some higher ideal that these geniuses left us and that continue to reach people, to touch people, to inspire people, generation upon decade upon decade, century upon century. And that, you are ultimately an advocate for the composer and an advocate for the people that are creating the music. You're doing something very daring as a conductor. You're standing in front of a group of professionals, asking them to marginalize their own musical freedom and to assume your vision as though it's their own. And that requires trust, which is ultimately the fulcrum of any leadership relationship. Trust. Trust through accountability, through knowing the music thoroughly, for always having the attitude that the buck stops with you, even if it's something that you don't think is your fault. When I'm in rehearsal or when I'm in performance, if something's not working, before I ask the musicians to change something, I'm always asking myself, what is it in me that's creating a barrier for the music, for this person, for this section? Efficiency, and that comes back to knowing and accountability. Efficiency. Respect their time. Know what you want and deliver it directly and unambiguously. By doing that, you communicate that you want what is best for all, and as a result, even in scenarios where individuals may have a point of conflict, that if they know at their core that you are striving as their leader for what is best for all, that within that you also do want what is best for them. And that level of trust is essential for navigating both the bad times and the good. This trust also extends to the conductor's relationship with the audience and the orchestra, because ultimately we're here to perform music and to share music with as many people as possible. Our job is to invite you in. The synergy, the circuit of music is not complete without the audience there. The audience plays an essential role in the realization of music. Music is a communion. But it's our job also, like I said, if something's not working, if audiences aren't coming or if audiences aren't enjoying, it's our job to look inward and say, well, what are we doing that is not reaching the audience? How can we break down barriers to the music for the audience? And that's my big mission at the Kansas City Symphony, is to give every individual that comes into our concert hall their own window into the music, their own point of personal connection into the music. And that is accomplished in so many ways. The types of concerts that we offer, whether it's our classical series for people who really love classical music, whether it's our pop series this weekend where we have Amy Grant coming in to perform with the orchestra, whether it's our series, which are designed for people of all ages to come as families and enjoy. In April, we're doing a concert called Harry Potter and the Magic of Music. We've started a new series for people that really are new to music but are very curious. A series that I conduct that's called Classics Uncorked. Our next one's on February 23rd. It's called If It Ain't Baroque. And that series is after work. You come after work at 7 o'clock. It's about an hour of music. It's narrated. There's lighting. There's all sorts of interaction with the audience. There's occasionally audience participation. It's very casual, and you get a free glass of wine with your ticket, and the orchestra comes out into the lobby and hangs out with you. It's a guided tour of music for those that may have never been on that particular journey before, and a fresh perspective for those who have. Our Screenland at the Symphony series, where the orchestra plays the live soundtrack to music that's playing up on a film screen. We have highlights from all the Pixar movies coming up in mid-April. So opening windows, but also showing that not only are we asking the community to be invested in us, but really giving back to the community also through commitment to education. Every year, over 54,000 grade school students and adults attend our education events. This includes our education concerts that we do where kids bus in from their schools over the course of the school year, free master classes, open rehearsals, discount tickets for students, our pre-concert talks, our work with the Youth Symphony of Kansas City, our work with University Academy, our work with the various conservatories and music schools around. Other initiatives, we have musicians on a regular basis now going in to perform at the Lansing Correctional Facility, and I cannot even begin to describe how inspiring those performances have been, both for the inmates at the correctional facility, but also even more so for the musicians that participate in them. Free concerts. Over 70,000 people attend free symphony events every year. Our Happy Hour Chamber Music series in the hall, our Pops in the Park series, Celebration at the Station, at Union Station. And the symphony makes a point of engaging in the civic identity of the city and the city's most important cultural events, whether it was the opening of the Kauffman Center 4 years ago, Celebration at the Station, like I mentioned, World Series Game 6 2 years ago, Thursday Night Football earlier this year, although that didn't work out so well for the Chiefs. I was there, I saw it. All told, the Kansas City Symphony generates $19.5 million in annual economic impact and $1.7 million more in state and local tax revenue. Those are the numbers. But there's an argument for me that's much deeper and much more elemental. And as I stand here in a room full of medical professionals, I can say with full conviction that classical music is a healing art. Music can ease pain, both emotional and physical. It can accelerate healing. It can motivate performance. How many of us listen to music when we're working on a very difficult task or when we're out for a run or a bike ride? It can reduce stress. It can induce a meditative state or a hypnotic state. And I say that both for when you're in the audience listening to a concert. It's also very much true when you're a performer. There are moments in performances that are going exceptionally well where you really do feel like the music is playing you rather than the other way around. Music can relieve symptoms of depression, and it can also elevate your mood, which is just a fancy way of saying it can inspire you and it can give joy. And, you know, in a society that is increasingly dependent on communication, but not as much in community, where we are increasingly isolating ourselves by virtue of the resources that are available to us, symphony orchestras, along with sporting events, are one of the few venues in which large groups of people come together anymore to share in a passion and to find inspiration and to find joy. And that's the strongest argument that I can make against any of the stereotypes about classical music that are out there. The strongest arguments that I can make is what's going on in Kansas City right now, what's going on at the Kansas City Symphony. Other communities don't have it as good as we have with the symphony, and I encourage you to take full advantage of it, because music fills us with a sense of pride, joy, possibility. And so I encourage you that no matter what your art, whether it's musical or medical, persevere, go forth with conviction and humility, be accountable to yourself and to those around you. Don't just listen, but hear your colleagues and show your charges the trust that you have in them. And we won't be perfect. We'll all get things wrong. We'll all be human. But if we're always searching for that common humanity in each other, in everything that we do, that just might be enough. So Please be a leader and a player both in your own personal symphony and strive to make all of its voices sing together. Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions any of you have. Yes. Oh, sorry. 1, 2. Yeah.
I have the microphone. So for somebody whose exposure to classical music is limited to Disney's Fantasia, do you have like a go-to song or collection that you would recommend they listen to?
Disney's Fantasia is actually a great start. I'm not kidding. I mean, Disney's Fantasia is incredible in that the music that is on that is some of the greatest music ever written, some of the most substantial music ever written. And those cartoons are incredibly musical. I actually never saw Fantasia until I was 24. Somehow it evaded me. My parents never showed it to me. It wasn't until I was learning Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, the Pastoral Symphony, that I went on YouTube and just stumbled upon the Fantasia cartoon on that symphony, you know, the one with the baby unicorns and with the nymphs and everything like that. And I was like, now I understand this music. So Fantasia 2000, and then let's see what else. A go-to collection. Oh, that's a really good question. I don't know if there's anything that I would necessarily recommend, but everything is on YouTube. And YouTube is an amazing tool. So if you hear something that you like, the most important questions to answer are, who wrote this? And then look for more and just take your own personal journey is what I would say. We had one over there.
Who is your favorite composer?
My favorite composer. I don't know if I have one. It's kind of like asking a parent to pick out their favorite child. I'm too young to be picking out favorite composers because I've only just begun to scratch the surface, and I still have not found something. I still haven't found a piece that I haven't found something to be fascinated by. If you want me to pick, I mean, I'll rattle off a couple of names and my reasons for it. Bach. Bach is the greatest of them all. I don't know if he's my favorite. He's one of my favorites. He's the greatest of them all. He's the father of modern harmony. He seemingly did not write anything bad. His music is transcendent. Beethoven, possibly the most human of all composers. Mozart, the most celestial and perfect of all composers. Mahler, the most universal. Debussy, the most artistic. Aaron Copland, deep soft spot in my heart for Copland and all American composers. And the list goes on. Yeah. Other questions? Oh, wait, we have Dr. Klein down here, and then there.
And I'll move the microphone too. So you said practice, and what came to mind was Allen Iverson's comment about practice from the NBA about practice. We're just talking about practice. How do you get these incredible musicians to practice more in terms of rehearsal and putting together that final product?
Well, most of the preparation for any symphony rehearsal comes before the actual first rehearsal happens. I'd like to think of the 80-20 rule. That 80% of the preparation comes before the rehearsal. Everybody's done all of their practicing at home, so that the rehearsal is really not for learning the music, but putting it all together. Most of the concerts that we do are on maybe 1 or 2 rehearsals maximum. And generally speaking, you actually don't need to motivate professionals to practice, because I talked all about the level of passion and the number of obstacles that professional musicians need to overcome in order to get to a full-time position, and there's a lot of pride that goes into that. I've never encountered a professional musician, no matter what their age, level of experience, level of jadedness or idealism. I've never encountered a professional musician who wanted to sound bad. And the best way to motivate others, if they need that motivation, is to stand up there and be the most prepared, the most passionate, invested person in the room. By example. Yeah?
That was pretty much my question. How much rehearsal time would there be for an actual performance?
About our classical series concerts, which are sort of our core bread and butter. We do 5 rehearsals for those. Those programs are usually also much longer than other concerts. Almost everything else, 1 or 2. 1, 2, 3, yeah.
Do you still play cello?
Do I still play cello? In spirit? No, it's actually that's one of the big things that I've let slide over the last 2 years as I've become busy. I mean, I never like to say that I don't have time to do anything, because you can always make time, but I haven't really had time to, and I miss it terribly. Yeah. Oh, wait, do we have a microphone nearby, or? No, I can hear you. Mm-hmm. I am under 30, still, only for a couple of more months. Staring down the barrel of that one. The question, if you didn't hear it, was how do you deal with the egos of people in the symphony or in any orchestra that I conduct that are older than me, and being the young buck that comes in, and how do you deal with that dynamic? First of all, I can say I've really not had to encounter much ego at all in the Kansas City Symphony. The Kansas City Symphony, and I'm not touting a party line or anything like that. The Kansas City Symphony is among the most good-natured collections of musicians in the entire country. And from the moment that I walked in, I got the sense that everybody wanted me to succeed, especially, actually, the older musicians in the orchestra who, felt a sense of mentorship and almost a parental sense of guidance with me. So that's really, fortunately, I've never had much of an issue with that. And, every now and then, and again, not here, but other places that I've gone, every now and then you have somebody who, wants to be a little bit obnoxious just to test you. And the answer to that is respect. You respond to those things with respect for the other person, whether they deserve it or not, and respect for the process, and you just stay on task. We had one over here. I think this woman here had a hand up a while. And then we'll go back to you, sir.
So looking at what my generation has kind of substituted for classical music, we do a lot of the soundtracks and the composers of those. What are your views of the values of classical music versus soundtracks, or do you find that it's just a different manifestation of the same type of music?
I don't know if it's 100% a different manifestation of the same type of music. I actually really love music soundtracks. I mean, we just did a show of the full Star Trek, the J.J. Abrams Star Trek, and that was awesome, and I conducted it, and it was one of the most fun experiences I've ever had. I think the difference is that a lot of soundtrack music is incredible, and I've been nerding out on the Force Awakens soundtrack lately. Really, I really want to conduct that. But sometimes, for me, soundtrack music can be exciting, but also potentially an incomplete experience, because I think that the drama of the movie that we associate it with is part and parcel of a soundtrack. But that said, we sometimes perform ballet music without the dancers in symphony orchestras, which is essentially the same thing. I think it comes down to drama. I think that one of the reasons why younger generations, and myself included, get turned on to soundtracks is because there is a direct access point to the drama of that music. We have a point of reference for the music, which is great, which is really all you need to enjoy a piece of classical music that may seem a little bit more abstract on its surface. And I think that's something that we as performers can do a better job of, particularly with young people that are curious and want context, contextualizing the drama of the music and not necessarily just expecting people to understand straight away. So I guess I started out by saying that they're different, but they really actually, I do think are part and parcel of the same thing, and it's just, it's a matter of creating the best possible scenario for people to experience it in. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Kansas City is well known for jazz music, and how about the classical music? Could be interrelated with the the jazz music and intermittent with this, with your symphony orchestra?
Well, there's plenty. There are plenty of ways, actually, to connect classical music and to connect jazz music. I think, music for me is a fluid spectrum. It's all music at a certain point. American music in particular, many American composers are very much jazz influenced already. Obviously the first being George Gershwin. But Aaron Copland, even going into the present, composers like John Adams, not the president, but he's a living composer living in California. I think you actually do find echoes to that in composers of American orchestral music, because one of the reasons why I love American music is because actually it is so interconnected, whether it's classical or jazz or Broadway or rock or hip hop. They all sort of stem from this idea of rhythm, of rhythmic fixation. And so to answer your question, yes, there is overlap and there is potential for more. Yes.
One, thank you for mentioning Bach first. I could sing and listen all day. And number two, I think there's probably 3 people in here as old as I am. But my first exposure, my husband's first exposure was cartoons because it was free.
Yeah.
There was no copyright on it. So, and our children, they heard it played all the time.
Yeah.
And so, but thank you for being here very much.
Thank you. I'll tell you something. There are a lot of, it's harder now for classical music for a lot of reasons because, because the creators of mass entertainment, and I don't use that as a pejorative, just as a fact, that the creators of mass entertainment don't utilize classical music now the way that they used to. So we're not exposed to it in as straightforward and natural a fashion as we were even one generation ago. Actually, one of the great tragedies was that when Walt Disney started Fantasia, they were going to make a new one every 5 years with different classical pieces, but it fell by the wayside for a variety of reasons. And then the other challenge is that music education isn't as much of a priority in schools anymore, which is why the responsibility falls even more heavily to organizations like the Symphony and other musical organizations to be that teacher and to be that advocate.
Thank you for being here. My question is about your take on the Orpheus Chamber Ensemble. And is that an ensemble in which everyone is a conductor, or is that an orchestra with no conductor?
Okay, so the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra, for those of you who don't know, is an orchestra that is in New York. It's a full orchestra that does not have a conductor. And that is an incredible feat on their part. I love Orpheus. I think that there are a couple of other groups out there that are like them. There's a group out of Boston called A Far Cry that does the same thing. There aren't many groups of people in the world that can do that. I think that it's not that everybody in that orchestra is a conductor. It's that everybody that is either a large chamber group or an orchestra full of chamber musicians, and it doesn't exist that far off on the spectrum of orchestras that have conductors in them. I think at the ideal, any orchestra, even with a conductor, is a large chamber music experience. Like what I talked about, when to conduct, when not to conduct, when to share your vision and when to listen to their own. A conductor is a chamber musician just like anybody in the orchestra. So I think, in a sense, that Orpheus, I guess, is an ideal, but I'm trying. There's a joke about well, can I make a bit of a? I'm in the presence of doctors. Can I make a bit of a juvenile joke to end? Promise you won't lose respect for me. There's a joke about conductors and contraception, shall we say? Safer with, more fun without. So I guess something like the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra is an ideal to strive after. I totally just lost all of you, didn't I?
I think we're at closing time. Wanted to make one comment. Unbeknownst to you and people in the audience here, your presentation was streamed. And another 47 folks, so it was basically a full house. I thank everyone for coming, and I thank you for a great presentation.
Thank you, everybody. Was that a closed stream?
Closed stream, yes.
Okay.
It goes to faculty members and staff members of the institution.